Just glue it on. How do you say caught, like the past tense of catch? I say caught, but it seems like some people say cot, like a cot that you sleep in. Which to me sounds wrong since there's a whole OUGHT involved. But I didn't even realize I said caught any differently from the rest of the country till I moved away from Brooklyn. So depending on where you're from, these words like caught, bought, draw may all sound different. I meant cot, bot, draw. Where you grew up more or less dictates how you sound when you speak. In the US, we have dozens of different accents, from the Southern California surfer brah to the Southern drawl. Even different neighborhoods in the same city may not sound alike. Growing up with Brooklyn Italians is very different from growing up with Brooklyn Russians. But our accents don't just affect our pronunciation, they also affect how we're treated and how we treat others. I'm Dolly, and today on Zoetic, we're talking accents. The science behind why humans speak the same languages so differently, the social benefits and drawbacks, and how our speech can impact our relationships. Accents are kind of crazy and, surprisingly, not confined to humans. Did you know that even animals have accents? Seriously. Cows, goats, and birds all have regional accents. Based on where they are in the world, the sounds they make are slightly different. You think Brooklyn pigeons sound anything like Italian pigeons? Where Brooklyn at? You guys, even fish have accents. That's right. A UK study found that cod develop different mating calls based on where they breed. Clearly, there's something evolutionary to these varying speech patterns. For us humans, our accents are heavily influenced by early brain development and socialization. Our regional accents tend to come from the historic settlers, or imperialists depending on how you want to interpret history, of the places we're from. Think French influence in New Orleans or British influence in New England. But with language, there's a lot of room for interpretation. I mean, you and your friend might say this word completely differently depending on where you're from. Same for these words: caramel, crayon, lawyer, mayonnaise. On the social side of things, accents help us feel more connected and help us understand each other more deeply. Meaning if you grew up saying pecan and you move to the South where people tend to say pecan, you might start saying pecan too. That's because people often pick up accents as a way of fitting in. Honestly, I didn't even know a nut could cause so much drama until I lived in Texas. Even when two people don't share the same accent, researchers have found that people naturally imitate each other's speech patterns, even those of complete strangers, without intending to. They think this comes from a subconscious desire to empathize and affiliate. Think about all the times you and your friends end up using the same slang. I know, I do it all the time. Basically, the more we sound like one another, the more likely we are to connect with one another. When we say the same words in the same way, we tend to communicate better. But if we communicate better when we share accents, why is it so hard to acquire a new accent when we want one? I mean, maybe you've been taking French classes for like ever, but when you say we, it still doesn't sound right. Maybe you even lived abroad and studied hard to blend in, but you still stick out like a sore thumb. Why is that American accent so hard to shake? It has a lot to do with phonemes, or the sounds that are the basic building blocks of language. One reason it's so difficult to get rid of that foreign accent is that you're being forced to use sounds that you've never used before, like the rolling R in Spanish, ferrocarril, or the nasally sound in French, je m'appelle Dolly. And those sounds become ingrained from the time we're babies. When we reach a year old, before we even begin to speak, we start responding to our parents' accents and stop responding to others. For example, I can distinguish between Cantonese tonal sounds like chong and chong, but you probably can't if you're not a native Chinese speaker. Cantonese is actually a pretty colorful language with at least 6 tones, though some even say there are 9. And that's why Cantonese people are so good at cursing and come up with new curses every year. The permutations are endless. What we hear from our parents forms the neural pathways for language, also known as synapses, in our own brains. As we get older and those networks of language solidify, it becomes harder to learn a new language and speak it without an accent. One theory is that when we learn a language later in life, our brain tries to use existing synapses from our native language. If there are phonemes and sounds in the language we're trying to learn that don't exist in our native language, we're probably going to struggle with pronunciation. Unless you're a bilingual baby. Babies exposed to multiple languages at a very young age have the synapses for both. You might be thinking, so what? Accents are great. Accents are sexy. I think Southern accents are sexy. Maybe Texas just gave me a love for the country twang. That was weird. While accents can be cute, they can also be the root of unjustified discrimination. People make snap judgments all the time based on other people's accents. You do it, I do it, we all know people who do it. In the US, students from rural southern Appalachia said that they participated in class less because they felt they were being judged for their accents. It even made some of them doubt their own intelligence as a result. Research in the UK found that accentism is similar to racism. A third of people who changed their accents said that they felt ashamed of how they sounded. I know a bunch of kids from Brooklyn who never learned their parents' native language because their parents just felt so discriminated against when they had accents, and they didn't want their kids to suffer the same consequences. And people who have a heavy accent are sometimes perceived to be less credible. Might be because our brains have a harder time interpreting information when there's a foreign accent involved. The implications of all this could be huge. What if a court eyewitness has a foreign accent, or someone who's interviewing for a job? Would they be perceived as less believable? The Civil Rights Act prohibits discrimination based on national origin, but it doesn't mention accents. And while most people accept that discrimination based on skin color is wrong, bias against people with accents is not commonly thought of as a form of prejudice. We live in an increasingly global society, which means we're more likely to come in contact with people who don't sound like us. What do accents mean to you? These questions are worth asking because accents are totally natural, but each of us could be holding subconscious biases toward people who sound a certain way. Do you guys ever feel like you've been discriminated against based on how you speak or how you sound? I know not all accents were made equally. Talk to us in the comments, subscribe to Zoetic. Thank you guys for watching, and